Welcome to episode 3 of the Byzantine Empire series. Let's continue the journey. Yet Justinian II did not abandon his plans. In exile in the Crimea and later with the Khazars, he regrouped. He even married the sister of the Khazar Khan, reinforcing his alliances. In 705, he returned with an army of Bulgarian and Slav mercenaries. Moving stealthily through the city's hidden drains, he won back Constantinople. Cruelly, he executed his rival emperors and their supporters, firmly re-establishing his rule. In those years, he showed himself again energetic. He renewed campaigns in the Balkans and Anatolia. However, by then the empire was stretched dangerously thin. His putative campaigns included even sending raiders to Italy, but in the east, the Arab Caliphate began to press hard again, reclaiming parts of Asia Minor. Warfare returned. Justinian II took his armies to fight the Bulgars and to reinforce his border armies in Asia, but he also turned on Christian cities like Ravenna to reassert control over church affairs, showing that even in doctrinal issues he was heavy-handed. By 711, discontent in the army had grown again. Once more, a revolt erupted in the Themes. This time, even the soldiers in Constantinople joined a march against him. In November 711, Justinian II was captured and executed, ending his turbulent rule. The Byzantine throne would soon pass through a few more hands, but the Theme armies had made clear. Emperors lived or died at the behest of the soldiers they needed to survive. Through all these decades of catastrophe and chaos, one reality stood firm: the Theme system. It was the core of the empire's endurance. By dispersing military power regionally and binding soldiers to the land, the empire ensured that no single disaster could leave it completely helpless. Each new theme, each fortified frontier town, each village where a soldier farmer toiled was a small bastion against collapse. When the capital was besieged, it was those local troops and their cunning weapons who held the line. When usurpers threatened the throne, it was the Theme generals and soldiers who could make or break an emperor. And even in times of peace, the Themes managed agriculture, collected taxes, and kept watch on borders, maintaining a rhythm of life at home that matched the long march of history. As Chapter 7 draws to a close on the eve of Leo III's reign, we glimpse the fruits of these survival tactics. The empire by 717 was much smaller than it had been in 600, but it still stood in the world. The upheavals of the previous 70 years had been immense, yet Byzantium endured where so many others fell. Its secret lay not in conquest now, but in quiet resilience. In the stillness of dawn over Anatolian hills, or the routine mustering of a Theme's levy, the empire's strength was reborn every day. Through slow rebuilding of institutions, careful diplomacy, and the unwavering loyalty of the thematic armies, Byzantium preserved its integrity through the storm. The tale of this age is not one of bold expansion, but of steadfast survival. The Byzantines held fast under pressure, guiding their battered ship of state through dark waters until calmer seas lay ahead. In the early morning light of the year 717, the great city of Constantinople stirred beneath its ancient walls. A new emperor had just arrived, Leo, a soldier of Syrian birth who had risen to power in the Anatolic army. The empire he ruled was battered and frightened. In every direction, enemies had taken provinces. Beyond the wall to the east, Arab armies held the rich fields of Syria and Egypt. To the west, restless Lombards and Slavs pressed toward the Balkans and Italy. Constantinople itself still stood, the queen of cities, her domes and basilicas gilded with the first rays of dawn. But even in this majestic capital, there was an anxious hush. Word had arrived of a vast Arab army and fleet moving toward the city's walls. The new emperor, who would come to be called Leo the Isaurian, knew that the very survival of Byzantium depended on what would happen in the months to come. Leo's first act as emperor was to prepare the city for a siege. He strengthened the ancient sea walls along the Golden Horn, appointed commanders for the navy, and stockpiled food and weapons. An alliance was quickly arranged with Tervel, the Bulgar Khan to the north. Khan Tervel's warriors would attack the rear of any invaders. On a summer day, the Arab army and fleet arrived at Constantinople, intending to take the city by storm. They built a double line of forts on the land side and blockaded the sea walls with their ships. For nearly a year, from July 717 into the cold winter of 718, Leo and his subjects held firm. The defenders threw Greek fire onto the enemy fleet, driving the ships back. The citizens and soldiers endured famine and cold, but help arrived. Strange stories were told of storms wrecking the Arab ships, and a volcano in the Aegean burning bright with fire, likely Mount Thera erupting. Finally, the Arab forces broke and fled. The city had been saved. In those tense months, Leo's calm leadership and the unity of the people under his command had turned back a mighty foe. After the victory, the city celebrated with lavish festivals. Statues of saints and emperors gleamed in the sunlight. Processions wound through the marble squares, and churches echoed with hymns of thanksgiving. The people breathed easier, confident that God's favor had returned. Emperor Leo, however, saw not just triumph, but signs and omens. In the previous decade, Byzantine armies had suffered crushing defeats and lost ancient holy lands. In his mind, those losses were warnings. Perhaps the empire had fallen into error and must atone. The emperor turned inward, focusing on the empire's laws, finances, and faith. One of Leo's first reforms was legal. In 726, some records say 741, he issued the Ecloga, a new law code to replace the older Roman statutes. These laws were influenced by Christian teaching. Many crimes that once brought death now brought mutilation instead, considered more merciful under Christian humility. The Ecloga would guide Byzantine justice for centuries to come, translated into other languages as far away as Armenia and the Slavic lands. Leo also took a careful look at the tax system and the far-flung provinces. He organized the themes more strictly, arranging the army to be supplied from its own local lands, which helped tie soldiers' loyalty to their homelands. He fought against corruption among tax collectors and tried to refill the empty granaries with new harvests and trade. In fact, for all the turmoil of his time, Leo quietly left behind records of an empire that slowly became more stable. The fields in Asia Minor were settled with people from the east. The harvest grew, and coins of gold and silver started to circulate again as an honest currency. Yet even as the empire's belly filled, the emperor's mind turned frequently to the question of divine favor. Some clergy whispered to him that idol worship might be the cause of God's anger. Certain bishops believed that Christians had begun treating images of Christ and the saints like idols, bowing and burning lamps before them as though they were gods. Emperor Leo could not ignore these words. In the year 726, after a disastrous volcanic eruption threw ash upon both east and west, he decided it was a heavenly warning. He proclaimed an edict against the veneration of images. Overnight, an enormous gilded image of Christ that had adorned the chalk, the main gate of the imperial palace, was covered with a curtain, then later hauled away. In every church of the capital, the priests were ordered to remove or cover their icons, the gentle painted face of Christ on the walls, the shining panels of saints, even the carved wood of the Virgin Mary. All these were to be wiped away. Leo announced that only God, who made us with his word, could truly be worshipped. Any attempt to capture him in stone or paint was a dangerous idolatry. The Christian churches fell silent in the flickering candlelight, without their accustomed images. The rituals continued, but gone was the familiar sight of holy faces. Some men wept. Monks hid statues of Christ and Mary in secret cupboards, or buried them deep in forests. In the Hippodrome, a team of soldiers removed the grand icon from the chalk gate. Legend has it that those soldiers were struck down by lightning or by the anger of the crowd. Fearing unrest, Emperor Leo made a point of sparing lives. The rebellion that did flare up in Greece around the same time was crushed, and the local bishop was removed. But in Constantinople he ordered no harsh new massacres over the images. The Patriarch of Constantinople, a learned old man named Germanos, resigned in protest. Leo named a more pliant priest, Anastasius, in his place. When news of the edict reached Rome, Pope Gregory II and then Pope Gregory III wrote furious letters. They argued that to destroy holy images was to insult Christ himself. The people of Italy and the West mourned the loss of the familiar icons that had inspired their faith. But for Leo III, the matter was settled. The empire's fate, he believed, lay in obedience to his will. An empire without idolatry would regain divine protection. At first, icon worship continued quietly in the countryside and in distant lands. Syria and Armenia especially cherished their ancient images, but the official church of the capital had spoken. Images were no longer part of the realm's public faith. In June of 741, after decades of tireless work and in sound health, Emperor Leo died peacefully in his bed, the first Byzantine emperor to do so in many years. He had saved the city, rebuilt the frontier, and left a stronger realm to his son. His heir, Constantine V, the 4-year-old who had been crowned co-emperor by Leo in 720 and raised in purple, now took the throne as a young man of 32, with Empress Maria, the Khazar princess Tzitsak-turned peaceful Irene by his side. Almost at once, Constantine's reign was challenged from within. His own brother-in-law and brother to Empress Maria, Artabasdos, who governed the Armenic theme in Asia Minor, seized the moment. Artabasdos allied with the Patriarch of Constantinople and proclaimed himself emperor at Hagia Sophia, claiming to restore the veneration of images that his deposed father-in-law had abolished. The capital was briefly split, with Artabasdos controlling Constantinople and Constantine set up in the city of Amorion. For a year, two rival courts maintained truce, each raising armies and praying for victory. Then in 743, Constantine advanced and defeated Artabasdos in battle. By autumn he marched triumphantly back into Constantinople. In the Hippodrome, the blinded eyes of the usurper and his sons were paraded before the crowd. The Patriarch Anastasios was publicly flogged. The voice of the empire was restored. Yet the ordeal changed Constantine's fervor. He saw in his personal victory a sign that God approved of the iconoclastic cause. As emperor, Constantine V renewed his father's war on images with even greater zeal. In 754, he convened a grand council at Hieria, in the suburbs of Constantinople. Over 300 bishops attended, all hand-picked as supporters of the imperial line. They issued decrees that all holy images and statues must be destroyed, declaring it heretical to honor any painted or carved representation of Christ or the saints. Only the cross and the empty throne were left sacred, symbols of the unseen king. The Council of Hieria upheld that Christ, true God and true man, could not be properly contained in any art form. To depict him was to deny his divine nature. Back in Constantinople, the removal of icons went steadily on. Church walls that had once glowed with color were stripped down to bare plaster. The sacred images of Jesus, Mary, and the saints were smashed or scraped away. In every temple, a giant cross, plain and unadorned, became the sole image of faith. Even this modest figure, was sometimes enlarged and displayed as a reminder that Christ lived, but in spirit. The political implications of this iconoclastic campaign were vast. For centuries, monasteries and nunneries had grown wealthy and powerful from the donations of pilgrims who came to venerate relics and icons. Now, Constantine V confiscated much of that wealth. He ordered the great monasteries of Byzantium to surrender treasures, and he even required many monks to marry, pairing them off with nuns in a way that destroyed the monastic ideal of celibacy. Whole monastic communities felt persecuted. Some leaders were blinded, exiled to far corners of the empire, or worse. Many monks and nuns fled. Some found refuge in Italy or the Frankish kingdoms, taking with them Greek icons and books. These monasteries abroad became living reminders of the old faith. The emperor's crackdown reached deep into everyday life. Prayers to saints and even the veneration of relics were banned in Constantinople. A mother's crucifix no longer glittered at the bedside of her child. A traveler on the road no longer crossed himself before leaving. Instead, people offered prayers with hands open, looking beyond the heavens. This spiritual emptiness, for many, was devastating. In the countryside, far from imperial soldiers, secret chapels held hidden icons, a carved Madonna buried under floorboards, a fresco of Jesus covered with a painting of a landscape. The conflict tore families apart. An elder who revered the old ways versus a son who trusted the empire's new law. Meanwhile, Constantine V kept the frontiers busy. His removal of icons freed up funds and manpower. He built on his father's theme system by creating new elite armies called the Tugmata, well-trained professional units stationed near Constantinople that were directly loyal to the emperor. With these armies, Constantine campaigned on three major borders. In the east, he took advantage of unrest within the Arab Caliphate, sending Byzantine armies into Syria. He captured cities like Marash in echo of his father's victories and Melitene, and he resettled thousands of Christian families from those lands to Thrace in the Balkans. In 747, he even destroyed the Arab fleet off Cyprus. These raids into enemy territory were bold. For the first time in decades, Byzantium claimed the offensive. In the north, he marched into Bulgaria. He won a long series of battles against the Bulgars, driving back their raids and even defeating them at Anchialis in 763. These victories carried a mixed blessing. They kept the empire's enemies in check, but they also drained the treasury and exhausted the people. By the end of Constantine's reign, the empire had spent much of its wealth on war. In Italy, however, matters were dire. In 751, the Lombard king Astolph seized Ravenna, ending Byzantine rule in northern Italy. Without an army to send, Constantine watched as the popes of Rome became more independent. In the west, a growing resentment of Constantinople's religious policies took root. In 800, not long after Constantine's death, Pope Leo III would crown Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans, a final snub to Constantinople. The seeds of that schism were planted during the Isaurian era. When Constantine V died on campaign in 775, his son, Leo IV, nicknamed the Khazar after his mother's people, became emperor. Leo IV had been raised as an iconoclast since childhood, but he married an iconodule. His wife was Irene, a noble-born Greek who held sacred images dear. Emperor Leo was only 31 when he took the throne, and he moved cautiously. He faced immediate troubles at home. 5 of his own half-brothers, who had been sons of previous marriages of Constantine V, rebelled to claim the throne. They were quickly crushed, punished by exile and the cutting of hair, a disgrace for royalty. This only made Leo determined to follow in his forefathers' footsteps. But he also recognized how divided his people remained on the matter of icons. Under the cover of conciliation, Leo IV quietly eased some of the harshest measures. He allowed many monks who had been expelled to return to their monasteries. In some churches, he permitted a few select icons to be restored, especially images of the Virgin Mary, much to the delight of the Orthodox faithful. His reputation among the people who loved icons grew so much that he was even nicknamed Friend of the Mother of God. To show goodwill, Leo appointed an iconophile patriarch named Paul on the throne of Constantinople. These acts seemed to promise a thaw in the relentless cold of religious strife, yet Leo's reign was too short to solve the empire's woes. From 777 to 780, the third Abbasid Caliph al-Mahdi led 3 invasions into Anatolia. Generals like the fierce Michael Lacanodrakan, the very same who had tortured monks under Constantine V, managed to repel these Arab assaults. Leo himself took to the field against the Bulgars, but in 780 he fell ill. The story goes that he died of fever during a campaign, perhaps under the shadow of a mountain or on the banks of a river. His last act was to ensure that his young son would live. On September 8, 780, Leo IV died, leaving his wife Irene as regent for their 9-year-old son Constantine VI. After Leo's death, Empress Irene became the regent empress in all but name, ruling the empire in her son's name. The court buzzed with intrigue. Irene herself had been a champion of icons since her youth. In 787, she called for a council in the city of Nicaea, the site of Constantine the Great's earlier council in 325, to address the pain that iconoclasm had caused. Bishops were summoned from all corners of the empire. At the Second Council of Nicaea, in 787, at the summit of the Council Hill, the scene turned symbolic. The icons were physically carried back into the churches. The council solemnly declared that veneration of icons was proper and blessed, not idolatry. The ancient practice of praying before the image of Christ or Mary was recognized as a way to honor the prototype, Christ or Mary themselves, rather than the painting itself. For the first time in decades, crosses and icons once again stood side by side over the altars. The memory of these moments must have felt miraculous to many. In Constantinople, the Hagia Sophia and other great basilicas saw icons placed once more on their walls. The faithful celebrated late-night liturgies by the light of candelabra, reflecting off holy images. A generation of Christians who grew up on empty walls now beheld the familiar faces of Christ, his mother, and the saints, painted again in color on shimmering mosaics. In hilly places like Cappadocia or Palestine, secret icon dwellers came out of hiding, grateful that the empire now embraced what they held dear. Yet the shift in power at court was uneven. Constantine VI was declared of age and crowned as co-emperor in 781. Mother and son quarreled over actual authority. At times he pushed his mother aside, at times she returned with support from Armenian soldiers. Those struggles weakened the center. Constantine VI's own missteps alienated the very factions vying for influence. He fought wars against the Bulgars, suffering some reverses which undermined confidence in him. In 797, a coup supported by Irene succeeded. Constantine VI was captured by soldiers of his own mother and blinded as punishment. He died shortly thereafter from his wounds. On August 1, 797, Irene proclaimed herself as the sole Basileus, emperor of the Romans, the first woman to rule the empire in her own right, though she called herself Basilissa, Empress, in everyday use. Irene's first acts as ruler were a synthesis of her lifelong beliefs and her political needs. She remained a devout supporter of icons. The Second Council's decrees were enforced. Iconoclasm was now officially anathematized. Elsewhere in the empire, the churches re-established the old liturgical celebrations on August 15, Feast of the Dormition of Mary, and January 15, Feast of the Baptism of Christ, which had been abolished under Leo III. At the same time, Irene sought peace. She negotiated treaties with both the Abbasids and the Bulgars. She shored up the frontiers, sending envoys and gifts to enemies to buy neutrality. Politically, she reached out to her former rivals. She corresponded with Charlemagne and even restored alliance ties, recognizing that the West was no longer the lost province it had once been, but a rising power. In 804, 2 years after her fall, the Pope would even recognize Charlemagne as emperor. But Irene's policy hints were already moving Byzantium toward making peace with the world beyond her walls. But Irene's rule was not smooth. She faced plots, nobles who resented her unprecedented power, and financial strains. The treasury had been emptied by decades of war and palace intrigue. She made harsh cuts and new taxes. The city felt all too aware of these pains. In 802, a new rebel emerged. Nikephoros, the emperor's finance minister, led a coup. On October 31st, 802, Irene was deposed and exiled to an island. The Isaurian dynasty, named for Leo in his line, though born in Syria, he traced his legend to Isauria, had come to an end. The Isaurian rulers had saved Byzantium from collapse. Under their careful reform and bravery at the walls, the empire survived a dark century. Armies were refilled, borders were held, and many reforms, like the theme armies and the Ecloga Code, made the state stronger. They reclaimed a sense of Roman order in a time of chaos. But the great experiment of iconoclasm, the deliberate destruction of holy images, also tore at the heart of Byzantine society and its relationships with the world. The iconoclast emperors sincerely believed they were renewing the church and empire, purging it of idolatry. To them it was an act of faith. To others, it was tragic punishment. Centuries later, many would judge iconoclasm as a wounding of the church, one that separated East and West emotionally and spiritually. In the Byzantine East, iconoclasm faded after Irene's counsels, and the love of icons returned as a cherished tradition. But the memory of those barren walls would linger. In the West, the legacy was different. The popes of Rome looked for patronage and protection elsewhere, eventually crowning a new emperor in the person of Charlemagne. Long after these emperors lay sleeping in their mausoleums, Byzantium would remember them as both saviors and agitators. The peace of the flickering candle in a dark chapel, once shadowed by uncertainty, was restored in the end. Yet the long night of iconoclasm had passed through an empire of wise men and warriors, leaving a tale of faith, power, and conviction. Now, in the glow of remembrance, one can imagine the city's lamps being lit again. The solemn procession of clergy holding icons to their hearts, and a gentle ending to an age of strife, all of which lulled Byzantium back to its dream of harmony and continued life. In the year 867, the Byzantine Empire passed from one turbulent era into another, as Basil I, a man of humble origins, seized the imperial throne in Constantinople. He founded what became known as the Macedonian dynasty, named for his native region of Macedonia. Under Basil's rule, the empire began to stabilize after decades of strife. He was a devout Christian and a vigorous ruler. Early in his reign, Basil I dedicated his crown to Christ and worked quietly but steadily to reform the government. He organized and simplified the Roman law into a new code, later called the Basilica, laying a foundation of justice. He also took care to honor the church. He reconciled with the Patriarch of Constantinople, by setting aside the controversial Photius and restoring Patriarch Ignatius, actions welcomed by the Pope in Rome. All this helped heal old divisions and bring unity to the empire's faith. Under Basil's guidance, the empire's administration became more efficient. Provincial themes, military districts were firmly organized. Local farmers and soldiers, the small landholding stratiotai, were protected, while the power of the great landowning families was kept in check, so that the state would remain strong and not fall under the sway of nobles. In the palace, a quiet army of secretaries and eunuch officials took up their posts. Scribes recorded every law and decree, and ministers, called logothetai, managed the finances, the army, and foreign relations. The emperor himself moved solemnly through gilded halls of the great palace, surrounded by priests who sang hymns and courtiers in richly embroidered garments. Each day began with morning prayers in the chapel and was marked by carefully ordered ceremonies, a slow rhythmic life of duty and devotion that gave the court its unique majesty. Yet amidst this formality, learning was encouraged. Basil I rebuilt old churches and built new ones, notably the Nea Ecclesia in Constantinople, whose walls would be covered with dazzling mosaics. Monks and scholars in city and countryside copied ancient Greek manuscripts. Through these quiet efforts, classical learning and art began to reawaken, the first stirrings of what later came to be called the Macedonian Renaissance. Basil I was also a soldier emperor who looked to secure the empire's borders. To the west and south, he turned his attention to the Mediterranean. He forged an alliance with the Frankish Emperor Louis II and dispatched a large fleet into the Adriatic Sea. In 871, the Byzantines retook the city of Bari from the Muslim Saracens, and by 876, Bari and its region were once again under imperial rule. Byzantine ships patrolled the seas, and the way was opened for greater Byzantine presence in southern Italy, including Calabria. In the east, Basil had to contend with rebellious frontier sects and raiders. His generals crushed the Paulician insurgents in their fortress at Defreke by 872, ending their threat. Although Basil could not save all of Sicily, Syracuse finally fell to an Arab emir in 878. He did bolster the empire's eastern frontier. He built fortresses and highways across the mountains of Asia Minor and led expeditions to keep the Arabs at bay. When Basil I died in 886 after a hunting accident, he left behind an empire more secure and prosperous than when he had found it, its treasury filled, its laws in order, and its people largely at peace. Basil's son and successor was Leo VI the Wise, who reigned from 886 to 912. Leo was celebrated for his learning. He was well read in Greek philosophy, law, and theology, and he ensured that the intellectual revival continued. One of Leo's first acts was to complete the codification of laws that his father had begun. By 892, the Basilica, a collection of 60 books of law in Greek adapting the ancient Justinianic code, was finished under Leo's direction. For centuries thereafter, judges and teachers would refer to this work written in the common tongue to resolve cases and instruct students. During Leo's reign, the palace libraries and monastic scriptoria flourished. Scribes copied old masterpieces of Greek literature, medicine, and mathematics. In the quiet study chambers of Constantinople, monks translated ancient textbooks and charted new works of philosophy. The emperor himself supported this scholarly atmosphere. He had icons and frescoes painted with scenes from the Old Testament and churches decorated with gold and glass mosaics that glinted in candlelight. In one surviving image, Leo appears offering a model of a church to Christ, a symbol of his patronage of architecture and art. Constantinople of Leo's time was filled with illuminated manuscripts, hymnals, and the writings of the early church fathers, all lovingly recopied for future generations. Leo VI also had to guide the empire through war, though with mixed fortune. Early in his reign, he found the northern border threatened by Simeon I of Bulgaria. A campaign against Simeon in 894 ended in defeat at the Battle of Bulgaro-Figan, forcing Leo to sue for peace. To secure the north, Leo even hired Magyar mercenaries to harry the Bulgarians. In the end, he paid tribute to Simeon, buying time for the empire. In the south, however, Leo's arms met some success. In 900, a Byzantine army destroyed the forces of the Emirate of Tarsus and captured its emir, cutting short Arab raids for a time. Leo also reorganized the eastern frontier. He created new theme districts like Lykandos and Leontokome on the advancing edge of Asia Minor, which helped Byzantine troops defend mountain passes against raiders. Nevertheless, Leo's dreams of recovering Sicily went unfulfilled. The island fell step by step. By 902, even the last Byzantine outpost at Taormina was lost. Yet the empire remained more or less secure, and trade flourished again under the protection of imperial garrisons. Leo VI's personal life was complicated by the strict rules of the church. He wished to marry for a fourth time, a scandalous request, so he negotiated carefully with the patriarch. Eventually, the church relented on his behalf, though Leo accepted a long penance. This episode showed that the emperor, despite his power, worked through compromise with church leaders. In fact, Leo built bridges with the church. He endowed monasteries and he issued laws to govern the clergy's behavior. He also reformed the court. For his beloved advisors, he created new titles like Masileopator, father of the emperor. But above all, Leo is remembered for continuing the gentle revival of learning. Under him, Byzantine culture turned again toward its classical roots, even as it built on Christian tradition. When Leo VI died in 912, the throne passed briefly to his brother Alexander, and then to Leo's young son Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus. Constantine reigned officially from 913 to 959, but for much of that time he shared power with regents and co-emperors. Still, he grew up surrounded by books and scholars, and when he finally ruled in his own right, he became a patron of letters as famous as Leo VI. Constantine himself wrote several important works. He composed De Administrando Imperio, a guide written for his son on how to govern the empire and deal with foreign peoples. In it, he included chapters on the customs of the Bulgarians, Russians, and other neighbors, invaluable knowledge drawn from both old tradition and new observation. He also wrote De Ceremoniis, a detailed handbook of court ritual and protocol. In those pages, the solemn choreography of the palace comes alive, how the emperor dressed, how ambassadors were greeted, how church processions moved through the streets. Constantine's De Thematibus described each provincial theme of the empire, its cities, forts, and people, giving a snapshot of Byzantine rule from the Danube to the Euphrates. He even oversaw an agricultural encyclopedia, the Geoponica, compiling farmers' wisdom on crops and livestock. These literary projects show how in Constantine's reign government and culture were intertwined. The elaborate court life continued with careful decorum. Mornings might begin with a private liturgy, followed by a council meeting in the palace's great hall. Secretaries took down imperial decrees as they were spoken, and messengers scurried out with scrolls addressed to governors in far-flung provinces. Yet many of these halls and chambers were rings of bookshelves, where philosophers and theologians joined the priests discussing ideas after vespers. The Macedonian emperors of this era were as likely to be attended by a teacher as by a general. Throughout the 10th century, the empire's armies were active as well. Constantine VII's regency partner Romanos I Legapinos, though not of the Macedonian bloodline, continued the dynasty's policies by strengthening the navy and pushing back against Arab pirates in the Aegean. Later, two remarkable Armenian generals took the throne. Nikephoros Phocas and John the Zimisces were both brilliant soldiers. Under Nikephoros, the empire captured the island of Crete in 961, ending decades of pirate raids against Byzantine shipping. He then campaigned in northern Syria and Cilicia, retaking territory once lost to Arab emirs. John Zimisces continued this momentum. In 969, he led the army into Syria and took the great city of Antioch. These conquests secured the eastern frontier and opened fertile lands to Byzantine rule. In the Balkans, both emperors kept peace on the Danube through diplomacy and force when needed. By 976, when the young Basil II became emperor, the empire's borders were stronger than they had been for generations. Basil II stands out as the mightiest of the Macedonian emperors. He is often called the Bulgar Slayer for the campaigns he waged against the First Bulgarian Empire. Early in his rule, he had to put down rebellions by Anatolian generals, cementing his control. Once those were ended, Basil turned his full attention to external enemies. For nearly 20 years, he fought Bulgaria. At the Great Battle of Claudion in 1014, Basil's army routed Tsar Samuel of Bulgaria and blinded thousands of captured soldiers. By 1018, Bulgaria was entirely brought under Byzantine rule. Its church made part of Constantinople's Patriarchate. In the Caucasus, Basil's generals campaigned in Armenia and Georgia. Local kings there accepted imperial suzerainty and Byzantine titles. Basil II also negotiated on other fronts. He renewed truces with the Fatimid Caliphate in the south, and in 989 arranged a historic marriage alliance with Kievan Rus. His sister Anna married Prince Vladimir of Kiev, who agreed to be baptized. This alliance brought the Vikings-ruled Slavic state of Kiev into Byzantium's cultural and religious orbit, and set the stage for a new Varangian Guard, Norsemen serving as imperial bodyguards. Through all these wars, Basil ruled at home with tireless energy. He was known for his personal austerity, wearing plain imperial robes and avoiding luxury. He reformed taxation so that peasant farmers would not lose their land to greedy nobles. In effect, he favored the smallholders who made up the backbone of the army. The great aristocratic families lost much of their ability to levy private armies. Instead, Basil built a more centralized military system. When the fighting was done, he found the treasury overflowing with gold. At his death in 1025, the Byzantine Empire was at its largest territory since the time of Justinian. It stretched from southern Italy and Sicily in the west, across Greece and the Balkans, all the way to the Euphrates frontier in the east. Constantinople and the great churches of Hagia Sophia and elsewhere glowed with new mosaics. The patrician class had swelled, learning had never been richer, and Orthodox Christianity was firmly established throughout the land and beyond. One can imagine the calm rhythms of Byzantine life at this peak. In the morning light, the emperor's eagle banner would flutter over the city walls. Merchants prepared their shops in the bustling marketplaces, guarded by imperial soldiery. Scholars in the Senate House or in monastic scriptoriums debated Plato's dialogues or copies of Archimedes' treatises by the light of oil lamps. Afternoon calls to prayer echoed from every church, reminding the faithful of the empire's spiritual unity. Eunuchs and viziers moved silently through the corridors of power, drafting edicts in Greek on parchment scrolls. Gentle lessons were given by tutors to the emperor's children on the ancient poets, while in the distance the sea carried the faint sounds of a naval squadron drilling off the coast. Religious life remained at the heart of society. The iconoclast controversies of centuries past were now a closed chapter. By this era, images of Christ, the Virgin, and the saints decorated almost every church. The emperors considered themselves God's representatives on earth and held the church in high regard. They convened synods, built monasteries, and endorsed missionary work. The mission of Saints Cyril and Methodius in the 9th century had earlier carried Byzantine Christianity to the Slavs, and now Byzantium nurtured churches in Bulgaria, Serbia, and Russia. As Basil II arranged, Vladimir's conversion in 988 bound the Rus to Orthodox teaching. Throughout the period, patriarchs and bishops served as loyal partners of the state, teaching the people and caring for the poor. Emperors from Basil I onward often ended their official speeches with pleas for Christ's guidance, blending the sacred and the secular. In law and governance, the Macedonian emperors solidified what they inherited from Rome. The basilica in Greek remained the legal authority. Courts across the empire could point to its passages when judging a case. Constant prose continued as the language of administration, the modern Greek tongue of Constantinople. The bureaucracy was vast but orderly. Departments managed the imperial purse, navy, armies, and public works. The great city of Constantinople itself dazzled travelers. Its hippodrome still hosted chariot races, its forums and avenues bustled with artisans, and its golden domes and marbled halls embodied the empire's glory. From the emperor in his purple chamber to the village priest in a mountain church, the Macedonian emperor's reach touched all lives. By 1025, as Basil II took his final rest, he had bequeathed an empire that was, in its time, the strongest and most cultured in Christendom. The Macedonian Renaissance had transformed Byzantium into a golden age of learning and art. Ancient texts, the works of Aristotle, Euclid, Galen, and others, had been saved by devoted copyists. New commentaries and histories were written in elegant Greek. Monastic schools taught grammar, philosophy, and scripture. Brilliant icons and mosaics adorned every cathedral and chapel, reflecting the morning sun like stars caught in stone. The very stones of Constantinople seemed to hum with the echoes of classical oratory and Christian chanting alike. The dynasty itself would last only a few more decades after Basil II, but its era left a lasting legacy. The system of governance they perfected, the legal code they fashioned, and the cultural heritage they nurtured became the inheritance of later Byzantines. Long after sleep took over the great cities and quiet covered the valleys, the light of that age endured in libraries and churches. Night after night, the gentle story of this age could be told to children, of emperors who loved both the cross and the classics, of wars that defined borders by day, and of mosaics and manuscripts that gave comfort and wisdom by candlelight. Thus the Macedonian Renaissance unfolded, a slow, steady bloom of renewal. It carried Byzantium through 3 centuries of change, ensuring that its legacy of art, faith, and learning would glimmer in history even as the ages moved on. In the quiet dawn of the year 976, a young man named Basil rose to rule the Byzantine Empire. He had grown up in the palaces of Constantinople, born in the purple as a true son of the imperial family. As a boy, he was crowned co-emperor alongside his elder brother Constantine, though others held power for a time. At 18 years old, Basil took up the reins himself. His long reign of nearly 50 years would become the most enduring of any Roman emperor. Under Basil's patient and steady leadership, the empire moved through both turbulent and peaceful seasons like a great ship guided by a sure hand. He sought not to dazzle, but to strengthen the empire in a calm and measured way. Basil's first years on the throne were shadowed by challenges within his own house and army. A powerful chamberlain named Basil Lecapenus, the emperor's great uncle, had run the government since Basil was a child. At the same time, two talented generals from noble families rebelled in turn. First came Bardas Scleros, a seasoned general who claimed the throne after 976. The conflict was long and wearying. Basil did not rush headlong into battle. Instead, he quietly gathered loyal troops and sought help from friends abroad, even sending envoys to distant Kievan Rus. Slowly, Basil's forces marched through Asia Minor. After months of cautious campaigning, the emperor's soldiers defeated Scleros in 979. Peace settled back into the provinces. Just as one threat faded, another arose. In 987, Bardas Phocas, who had once helped Basil against Scleros, raised his banner against the empire. The new revolt tested the empire's patience. Basil remained calm and determined. He mustered his armies and called on foreign warriors, including a regiment of Norse and Russian fighters known as the Varangians, to serve under his banner. Under his guidance, Byzantine troops crept towards Phocas's strongholds with steady discipline. After tense standoffs and small clashes, Phocas's support collapsed. In 989, the rebellion ended. With both Scleros and Phocas defeated, Basil quietly exiled the aging chamberlain, Basil Lecapenus, as well, taking full control of the government himself. By then, the once young emperor stood alone as the undisputed ruler, having secured his throne not with loud fanfare, but with patient resolve. With the home front secure, Basil turned his thoughtful attention to the empire's borders beyond the capital. The eastern provinces of Asia Minor and the Levant had long known periods of violence. Basil approached these challenges with the same steady hand he used at home. He forged alliances with regional rulers, the kings of Armenia and the princes of Georgia, making treaties and sometimes offering military aid so that they would remain friends rather than enemies. On occasion, when aggression threatened his lands, Basil would march his own armies eastward. At the end of the 10th century, armies from the Muslim Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt pushed north into Syria. In response, Basil led a campaign in 999 to 1000, marching across Asia Minor to lift the siege of key cities like Antioch. He met the Fatimid forces with determined tactics, but also with an eye towards negotiation. By the year 1000, he had arranged a new truce, securing the frontier so that peace could return to the southern provinces. In the far northeast, he marched into the lands of the Khazars and brought the Crimea under Byzantine influence around 1016, extending the empire's reach to the Black Sea. Through wars fought and peace treaties made, Basil held the empire's eastern frontiers firmly. Even as battles raged, he made sure ordinary life could continue quietly in the fields and towns behind his lines. Meanwhile, to the west of these campaigns lay the distant coasts of Italy and the islands of the Mediterranean. Basil granted Venice trading privileges to help protect the Adriatic shores from raiders, reinforcing the empire's control of important sea routes. Throughout these activities, Basil favored practicality over glory. He sometimes rode at dawn to inspect frontier camps or pen letters to governors, reminding them of justice and fair rule. His goal was always a stable empire, Whether on the calm roads of Asia Minor or on the stormy seas of the Mediterranean. Perhaps the most famous chapter of Basil's reign unfolded in the Balkans. For decades, the First Bulgarian Empire had been Byzantium's neighbor and rival. At the start of Basil's rule, the Bulgarians had regained much of their former territory and were led by Tsar Samuel, a determined foe. Basil did not underestimate this challenge. The war with Bulgaria would stretch on for many years, but he approached it with patience and resolve. Beginning around 986, Byzantine armies marched north into the rugged mountains and plains of the Balkans. Year after year, Basil's generals pressed forward slowly. They captured one fortress at a time, tightening the noose around the Bulgarian heartland. Tsar Samuel's forces responded with their own raids into Thrace and Greece, but Basil always had a plan. In some winters, the war paused, allowing farmers and merchants in the region to continue their lives under uneasy truce. When spring came, the conflict would resume in a cautious way. Little by little, Basil extended Byzantine authority further north. The decisive moment came at the Great Battle of Cledion in July 1014. Tsar Samuel had brought an army to face Basil's forces. The emperor's generals quietly maneuvered their men into position on the slopes above the battlefield. When the Bulgarians were surrounded, the fighting grew fierce. In the end, Basil's army prevailed. According to chroniclers of the time, Basil gave a harsh order. Of each 100 Bulgarian prisoners, only one man was left with sight, while the others were blinded, so that only 1 in 100 would lead them home. This severe measure, cruel by any standard, broke the will of the Bulgarian state. Tsar Samuel, weakened by these losses and by illness, died just 2 months later. After Samuel's death, the resistance collapsed. By 1018, Basil had peacefully incorporated all of Bulgaria into the Byzantine Empire. No more sons of Samuel stood on equal footing with emperors. The lands of Macedonia, Thrace, and all the Danube region were now part of Byzantium. Under the lights of Constantinople's great palaces, Basil could at last proclaim the Balkans secure. He took pride in these gains, but returned to the throne chamber and council quietly, leaving the daily work of integration to his governors. The empire's map under Basil was now the largest it had been in centuries, stretching from the Adriatic Sea in the west all the way to the Caucasus Mountains in the east. While Basil II was skilled in war, he also governed with equal diligence. He believed the health of the empire depended not only on armies, but on law and order at home. In the years of peace that followed his victories, Basil strengthened the central government. He took care to check the great landowning families that had grown too powerful. Large estates were limited, and laws were enforced to prevent nobles from seizing more peasant land. This ensured that property remained more evenly distributed under imperial oversight. Land and resources flowed into the treasury, making it possible to pay the soldiers who guarded the frontiers. In matters of finance, Basil was prudent. He oversaw the mints and coinage, maintaining the empire's gold currency as a standard in trade. Around 1010, he even introduced a lighter coin to facilitate everyday purchases, showing his attention to practical needs. He avoided waste. Unlike some emperors, Basil did not order lavish palaces built for his own luxury. Instead, when troubles came, he was ready to fund the army and the walls of besieged cities. In a gentle but firm manner, Basil reformed the tax system so that even remote provinces contributed their share. This stable revenue stream gave merchants confidence and allowed markets to flourish across the empire. Basil's rule also affected church and court. He had a keen sense of justice and insisted even the clergy followed the law. Monasteries and bishops were encouraged to devote themselves to faith and learning, but they could not amass wealth at the expense of the state. When he felt it necessary, Basil reminded church leaders that charity and worship should never exempt one from honest contribution to the common good. Because of this fair-minded rule, trade and agriculture grew quietly under his reign. Towns in Asia Minor and the Balkans saw new roads repaired and new schools opened with the emperor's blessing. The fourth episode on the Byzantine Empire is coming soon. Until then, take care.